A reunion for William and Harry, and is there another row brewing over the coronation? And how did the Queen really feel about Spare? That's right, it's another busy week for the royals, and at Palace Confidential, we've got the experts to answer all those questions and more. And back this week, after far too long away, is the Daily Mail's royal editor, Rebecca English, and opposite her, it's the paper's diary editor, but more importantly, heartthrob of the comments section, it's Richard Eden. Welcome to you both. Now, we're all celebrating our 100,000th subscriber to our YouTube channel, and if you haven't subscribed already, what have you been doing? Click that button for more great royal content and to make sure you never miss an episode of Palace Confidential again. And that's not all. We've also launched a TikTok. Yes, we're so modern. Find us at Daily Mail Royals. Right, now there's lots to get through today, but let's kick things off with the coronation, which, my dream team panel, is just a couple of weeks away now. And this week, much of the narrative is about your favourite subject, Richard. Who isn't coming? Who isn't invited? And in today's paper, you have a story about someone who lots of people will be particularly sad not to see there.
Yeah, I mean, the coronation guest list was always going to be a nightmare for King Charles and Queen Camilla.
You say grinning like a Cheshire cat.
Look, we had at the Queen Elizabeth's coronation in 1953, there were about 8,000 who were squeezed into the Abbey, but now it's about 2,000. So inevitably there's a lot of disappointed people. But some of these people are, you know, very big names, and it's been the aristocracy, really, that are being left out. And there are dukes, there's all sorts of people who would have just assumed that they'd always be invited to a monarch's coronation, have found they haven't received that invitation. The one in the paper today was a genuine surprise. It's Lady Pamela Hicks, who is the daughter of the first Lord Mountbatten of Burma, who was assassinated by the IRA. She was one of the Queen's two surviving bridesmaids, the other's Princess Alexandra. And yeah, she's found that she's not invited. She's not bitter about it at all, but she's confirmed she's not there. And it's kind of sad because she attended the Queen's funeral in a wheelchair. She was pushed by her daughter, India Hicks, who was herself a bridesmaid at King Charles's first wedding. And India had talked about how her mother was looking forward to being one of those very few people to have attended not one, not two, but 3 coronations.
Well, that's a bit heartbreaking.
So it just hasn't happened. She's 94, but she's put a very brave face on it, but she's made some interesting comments about it.
But do you have any intel on how that decision came about, why she would be excluded?
I think it's just that she doesn't have an official sort of role. So I think they're trying to stick to people that have kind of official roles with the royal household, or they represent charities. Remember, obviously, you're going to have thousands of world leaders, politicians. There'll be all sorts. It's a state occasion. That's the key thing. It's not a family event.
Will somebody think of the dukes, Rebecca? It's so sad. This meritocracy, not aristocracy approach has gone further than people were expecting. Is that fair to say?
I think that is fair to say, although I have to say I quite like it. I've always hesitated to use the word snubbing in anything I write, because that suggests that you feel you've got a right to be there, and I think when it comes to the coronation, probably nowadays nobody's got a right to be there. And I quite like the fact that the King's including more ordinary but very worthy members of the public, and these are the kind of people we want to give a pat on the back to. But I have to say I agree with Richard. I was very surprised that Lady Pamela Hicks wasn't invited, because her family is so intrinsically entwined with our current royal family, and she is kind of a grande dame of the whole kind of social scene. I was really surprised. I think India is also a goddaughter of the King, so there is so much. I thought she'd be there as a family guest, I have to say.
Do you think the royal family will be surprised at the attention this has generated, and they might sort of backtrack on that one?
Well, I think they probably have surprised, but they are surprised because the story came out via Instagram yesterday, because her daughter posted that one of her children said, I think we've had a couple of prank scam calls from Buckingham Palace. She went, no, it probably was Buckingham Palace actually, darling. And then they realised that one of the King's private secretaries was frantically trying to call the family to apologise for Lady Pamela not being invited. So I think they could tell that this might be a little bit of a hot potato.
Gosh, now Richard, you also wrote this week about a friend of Camilla's family who's been complaining about the guest list. What do you think about this meritocracy, not aristocracy?
Well, this phrase actually came from Lady Pamela Hicks. She said she understands why she's not invited because it's all about meritocracy, not aristocracy.
It's a really hard one to say. I wish we hadn't come up with that one.
But it's a very awkward sort of motto for a hereditary monarch. And I do detect, call me cynical, but I detect a little bit of a sort of jokey response in Lady Pamela's view, because, you know, if that's the view of our monarchy now, that somehow they're embarrassed by the hereditary principle, that, you know, they're really not going to last long.
Yes, that is a bit awkward. Yes.
So I personally think it's a great mistake for them to cut themselves off from the aristocracy. So essentially before, you know, we had a sort of social pyramid where the royal family would be at the top and they'd work their way down. And almost the whole point of the coronations in the past have been the various aristocrats have paid homage. You know, to have the dukes. We've only got 24 dukes, but they're making clear that's all gone. The royal family is separate. It's got nothing to do with the aristocracy anymore, but it does make them very isolated. And when you've got, you know, you've got papers like The Guardian sort of running a campaign at the moment to get rid of the monarchy, if they say, you know, we're the only surviving part, I think it's dangerous. And Queen Elizabeth was very much aware of this. When Tony Blair wanted to get rid of all the hereditary peers, she was said to have raised concerns about it. And in fact, then Prince Charles wrote to Tony Blair to say they've got a lot to offer. This is in Alistair Campbell's memoirs. So he sort of said, don't write off the hereditary peers. So for him to undergo this change of view is a bit worrying in my view.
I guess he's possibly just prioritised the look in our cost of living crisis times.
Yeah, I think it's a question of balance, isn't it? That there is a wind of change blowing, and it's probably overdue. But it's a balance of things becoming a bit more egalitarian, but not overly egalitarian, and also that massive reduction in numbers. How I know has created a real headache for the organisers about who's in, who's out.
What the viewers will find in 2 weeks' time is that it will look so different, because back in 1953 you'll see photographs of the Queen and behind her would just be the ranks of the aristocracy in their robes. Well, apparently the only few hereditary peers to have been invited this time have been asked not to wear their robes. So essentially it will look like a wedding, really. You'll have women in lovely hats and the men in their suits, but it won't have that, it will be very different from previous coronations.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, I heard from somebody who knows that the dress code for women is long white gowns, long white dresses.
Yeah, that is true, yeah. I mean, they are going to... The palace have been at pains to stress that, because I think there's a feeling that this is going to be, you know, a bit too modern and a bit too woke, and the palace have been at pains to stress they will be keeping the kind of best of tradition and pomp and majesty, but just trying to, you know, modern it up a little bit. I mean, there was a young boy I noticed tweeting the other day that's going, and he's earned himself a British Empire medal because he spent 3 years sleeping out in a tent to raise money for his local hospice, and he's got quite a kind of social media following. And the palace did some social media footage this week of some of the invitations having this beautiful calligraphy drawn on them, and he noticed that his was being inscribed, and he put on it, oh my God, my mum's crying again, my dad's crying, I'm really touched. And when you see something like that, you think, actually, I feel like it's right that he should be there.
Yeah,
you know, people have been really inspirational, especially during the pandemic and since.
The friend of Camilla's family who's sort of expressed publicly his concerns is Ben Goldsmith, whose sister Jemima was a great friend of Princess Diana, and he's gone public saying he hopes that King Charles doesn't give in to all these sort of drips and dullards, as he's colourfully put it, who want to
charming
who wants to reduce the spectacle of the coronation. So, you know, he was hoping that we'll respect the traditions. He mentions some of his friends who haven't been invited, such as the Duke of Somerset, and the Duke of Somerset, for example, was talking to friends about how he was preparing his family's state coach. He wanted to arrive in horse-drawn carriage, which would have been magnificent, but these people have found they're not actually invited.
I can imagine when can one get one state coach
Exactly.
out nowadays, if not for a coronation?
Have to wait for Williams now. Now, Rebecca, I want to move on to a story quite entertaining that came in too late, that you wrote about. It was too late for our programme last week, that how the Duke of Sussex was preoccupied by the seating plan.
Yes, so I was told there were a number of things that he had questions about before he agreed to come. Unsurprisingly, security, transport, logistics were one of them. But I was also told that he was very keen to find out where he was seated in the Abbey, who is going to be behind, who's going to be
where are the big candles?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was very, very excised to find out. Now, what this means, I don't know. Could it be simply he just doesn't want cameras focusing on him when no one's actually talking to him and he's been, sent to Coventry? Who knows? But I think, again, it shows that kind of... while they pay great lip service to the fact that we don't care about orders of succession, we're all very egalitarian, things like that do still matter.
Look, he should be just grateful he's been invited at all, frankly. Come on, we're talking about the 24 non-royal dukes, most of whom are not even...
The king's son.
They're not even invited, yeah. So, no, he should be grateful. He can't moan about what seat he's given.
What about poor old Fergie, Richard? No space for her.
Oh, Fergie, yeah, she's confirmed that she's not going, but apparently she has been invited to the sort of pop concert later. It's a tricky one, isn't it? I'd love to have seen Fergie there. I mean, come on, you can make space for her. This is the woman who, with her ex-husband, looks after Queen Elizabeth's corgis.
But why would you invite your son's ex-wife to your coronation when the seats are so tight? And I think she understands that. I mean, I think she's given a lot of polite answers, isn't she? About, well, I don't know yet, and if not, I'll be hanging out the bunting. And she's been quite classy about it, I think.
I don't know if this will actually make the cut, but you've just made me think, is this a crass question? If Diana was alive, what would have happened there?
She wouldn't have been invited.
But she is the mother of a future king.
As
it's an interesting one.
Rebecca's pointed out, with Fergie not being invited as an ex-wife, Princess Diana wouldn't have been invited either.
It's different though when your son's going to be king.
I think she would have been there, definitely.
If Princess Diana was alive, would Charles be crowned?
So it's a good point. It's one of those things.
Rip open those other infinite universes and.
Exactly.
I think it's one of these things that would have calmed down over the years, and they would have found a way to, co-parent amicably.
A really complicated one when William was crowned. But anyway, we'll move on. We will have more on all of that and a few other controversies in just a moment. But I want to turn to an unusual coronation tradition now. The monarch can stay the night before they're anointed in a special bed in the Palace of Westminster, also known as Parliament. It's that big building that you can see behind us. Now, if he chooses to follow that tradition, Charles would be hosted by the Speaker of the House of Commons, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, who showed us the historic bed.
This is the royal bed. This is the bed that is meant to be used by the monarch the night before the coronation. And the reason for that, of course, this was a palace, so of course this was always used by a monarch. But in the case of this particular bed, the last occupant of a monarch to use it before the coronation was George IV. And the reason for that was that some monarchs weren't as popular as others, and therefore this was the nearest point to being crowned across at Westminster Abbey. So it was easier to get access to the Abbey from the shortest distance, and therefore the bed is available, and it's here just in case King Charles III would like to stay overnight. So what I have done, I've sent a letter to His Majesty saying, your bed is ready, your bedroom is prepared in case you're of need and requirement of the House of Commons. And of course, like everything, the war, Second World War, the House of Commons was packing up, and part of Speaker's house was packed up, sent away and put into storage in case the bomb dropped on Speaker's house. And the royal bed was sent away, put into storage. Now, we're not quite sure what happened during the storage period. Somebody decided to sell the bed off, and the bed disappeared. And I've got to say, the museum service said, by the way, there is something missing from Speaker's house. There is an integral part missing, and that was the royal bed. So an advert was put out, an interview was done, and the newspaper said, does anybody know where this royal bed is? And thankfully somebody said, by the way, we've got that bed. The bed had been taken to Northampton. It had been put into an auction. And I've got to say, the family who decided to buy the bed, the mother had gone out. She actually went for 2 single beds and ended up with the royal bed. Wasn't sure, it was all broken down in packages. She brought it up and assembled it. And the bed was put up in Northampton. The family used the bed. They had a royal bed within their household. The House of Commons bought the bed back, brought it home to its home, which it is now, in situ, here behind me. We then put the royal bed on display for whenever the need might arise, in case we did have a new monarch. And of course, thankfully that didn't happen for a very long time. Tragically, Her Majesty died, but we now have the bed. So we're quite rightly using history to say to Your Majesty, that bed is available, it awaits your decision whether you need it or not. I did mention to His Majesty, he was the Prince of Wales, I said, by the way, Your Majesty, we do have a bed available to you on the night of the coronation. Because I said, I've got your bed ready. And he went, my bed ready? I said, absolutely. And I explained the reason. He said, the quirks of history. So it just shows that, yes, he is aware and that the bed is available. I think traditions matter. And of course, as we will see with the coronation, when we will see millions of people around the world wanting to watch the coronation, and the fact that the streets will be lined, that street parties across the United Kingdom will be taking place, and we are playing our part, and part of history is with this bed behind me.
Sir Lindsay Hoyle there, now sticking with the coronation, and one report this week suggested that Charles had a heart-to-heart with Harry, and when they were discussing his plans to visit. Rebecca, do you have a take on this?
Funny enough, I do.
That's handy. I'm glad we invited you.
I have to say, I agree. I think a conversation did take place between the King and Harry, but whether you could really describe it as a heart-to-heart, I'm not quite so sure. I suspect it was more along the lines of, Pa, I'm thinking of coming, and the King saying, darling boy, I'm really glad that you are. But the King is someone who, throughout family life, has shied away from kind of confrontation, and I mean, he likes people to write letters to him. You know, you have to schedule in phone calls. He's not the kind of person that will pick up the phone and start kind of pouring out his emotions down the line, particularly to California, particularly not knowing who's listening on the other end. I think heart-to-heart's probably, yeah, I think heart-to-heart probably exaggerated, but I can well imagine a phone call between father and son saying, good, and it could be the start of a process of reconciliation. Who knows?
Now, Richard, Robert Jobson said recently that he thought William should also attempt to speak to Harry, and I have a feeling that you might not agree with that.
With respect to our friend Robert Jobson, no, I don't agree with that at all. Because if I was Prince William, I would avoid Harry like the plague. You know, he doesn't need to speak to him. He needs what he needs is an apology from Harry first, you know, for all the things that have been said. I mean, where do you start? You know, it's not Oprah Winfrey, it's the Netflix series, his appalling memoirs where, you know, William ends up coming out like some sort of villain from that book. So the idea that they'll just have some sort of jolly reunion over a celebratory weekend, I really do think is for the birds.
I think most people would be surprised, Rebecca, wouldn't they, given the state of things, if they had a conversation?
Yeah, and it's interesting, at the start of this whole saga, people who knew them really well were saying to me, I can't imagine, they've been through so much together, I can't imagine a time that William and Harry, whatever happens, won't be able to find a way to work this out. You know, they've been through so much together, and those same people are not saying that now. You know, I know that William is not just hurt, but he's very angry, not just for himself, but what Harry put their late grandmother through, the things that he said about his father, and also his own wife. And I think that is going to take a lot more than just a brief, hi bro, I'm at the coronation before popping back off to America, I have to say.
And Richard, we also heard this week about Camilla's pain about Harry's descriptions of her in the book and in interviews.
This was a really interesting profile of Camilla, head of the coronation, in the Sunday Times. And what fascinated me was generally royal friends don't speak on the record. You know, you'll often get sources say or whatever. In this case, one of her best friends, it's the Marchioness of Lansdowne. She's a neighbour of Camilla's for decades in Wiltshire. One of her great friends. She chose to speak on the record. And what she was saying was how upset Camilla was by Harry's book, by the things that were said. I don't know if Camilla actually read the book or if she was just told what Harry had said, but it had left her very sad and disappointed, and I'm not surprised because, again, like William, she was the sort of villain of the piece.
Yeah.
And I think it's a big thing. The decision she's obviously let her friend speak on the record, suggests that she quite wanted it to be known that she wasn't happy about it.
It's interesting, isn't it, Rebecca? You've obviously spent a lot of time with the Queen Consort. I tease you about it all the time, but she has withstood a lot of public attacks over the decades now, but that doesn't mean that they don't affect her.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to put what Richard was saying into perspective, that, you know, the friend was saying, Fiona was saying, she has been hurt by what's said, but she looks at these things as part of a bigger picture, and her attitude has always been, and it's what I've seen firsthand, you know, least said, soonest mended, i.e. she might be hurt, but let's just get on with things and not make a fuss, and that's definitely been her attitude. But it doesn't mean she doesn't feel... I was thinking about this. I remember years ago, not long after she married the then Prince of Wales, and I was on tour with them in Canada, and at the time the kind of fuss of the wedding had died down and not a lot of royal correspondents were bothering to go on their trips, but I, because there were obviously younger, more glamorous members of the royal family to kind of chase after, but I always felt it was a really important part of my job to go and cover our future king and possibly queen. And this particular trip I had to leave early because I had to go home and take some tiles off the wall of my bathroom. Bear with me, there is a point to this story.
This is like the duality of your life is really quite
before
something.
the builders got in. And a word got back to her that I was leaving the trip early to do this. And I was at the last function of the job, and I had my suitcase with me, and I was going to cover the function, file it, and then quickly race to the airport. And she came, it was one of the first times she'd really spoken to me, and she said, "Is it true that you're leaving my tour to go into your bathroom?" And I said, "Yeah, it is actually." And she said to me, "Why doesn't your husband do your bathroom?" And I just looked at her and instinctively said, "Well, would you trust your husband to do the bathroom?" And we kind of both collapsed laughing. And I was like, "No, of course your husband wouldn't be doing the bathroom, clearly." But then she kind of turned serious for a moment. She said, "Oh, I'm really sad to hear that, because I don't think people realise how terrifying this role is, that, you know, when you're not born to it, you get out of a car and there's this huge, you know, battery of bulbs going off at you, and how scary it is. And occasionally I see the odd face, I recognise you, a couple of others, and it's, you know, someone I can look it in the eye and it's quite reassuring. And I think it was a bit of a moment of clarity for me, that I thought, God, this has not been easy on you. You know, everyone assumed, oh, she's got what she wants, she's married the Prince of Wales, she's in the royal family, and it really made me realise that actually it's not been an easy process for her, and probably wasn't something she wanted. So I think it made me realise for the first time how human she was, and how those kind of barbs, and we've obviously seen them continue over the years, and particularly this year, will actually wound her, when really she's just kind of tried and done her best because of the man she loved and she's married, to just get on with the job in hand, really.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that story. When are you going to write a book, Rebecca? We need all of this on the record and documented for the ages.
Grouting or royal tour, there's no
I just
choice.
forget half these things most of the time, Jo, and then something happens, I think, God, I remember that.
Oh,
yeah.
Absolute joy. Well, moving on, but Harry's not alone. The royal spares have often been fascinating characters, and here are some of the family's second in lines over the past couple of centuries. Well, a reminder that for more montages, which we know you love, and great royal content, make sure to subscribe to our channel. My thanks to Rebecca, Richard, and to you for watching. We will see you next week on Palace Confidential. Bye-bye.